Hi there, it's Taste of Lizzy Tea, and I am Julie, and this is Kinsley with me today, and we are going to be making the best homemade Italian meatballs. And as I make them, I'm going to show you how versatile they are as far as cooking them and serving them, but we will go ahead and get started making the recipe. So first I have 2 pounds of ground beef, put that in there, and 3/4 of a pound of Italian sausage. For the ground beef, I tend to go leaner, at least like 85% lean ground beef. We've also made these with ground turkey, so if you would like to use turkey instead, it works totally fine. So we have 2 pounds of ground beef, 3/4 of a pound of Italian sausage. Kinsley is going to crack 4 eggs into a measuring cup, and she's gonna whisk them together just so that we can get this mixed up a little bit more easily. So we are gonna add a cup of Parmesan cheese into the meat mixture. And I love, you like Parmesan cheese too, don't you?
Yeah.
So like the more Parmesan cheese, the better. We put Parmesan cheese on top of the meatballs and a lot in the meatballs. And I really think this Parmesan cheese is what gives the meatballs such a great texture and flavor. And then I'll put in 1/2 of a cup of Italian seasoned breadcrumbs. If you don't happen to have Italian breadcrumbs in your pantry, you can use plain breadcrumbs and then add a teaspoon and a half of Italian seasoning, and it ends up being about the same thing. So 1/2 of a cup of breadcrumbs. You can just pour those right on top. The spices that go into this is parsley, basil, pepper, and garlic salt. I like to use dried seasonings just because I have them in my pantry and they're easy to pull out just for whatever recipe. If you would like to use fresh, you can use fresh. You'll have to use a little bit more to get the same flavor if you choose to use fresh. So Kins, do you want to put in 1.5 tablespoons of parsley? And then I'm going to put in 1/2 teaspoon of basil. And then 1 teaspoon of garlic salt. I will measure this just because I don't want to put in too much salt. If it was minced garlic, it might be different, but garlic salt, gotta be careful with that. And then 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. If you'd like, you could add a little bit of fennel seed or red pepper flakes if you like, again, a little bit more spice. But some of that is already in the sausage, so you may want to make it as is first and then kind of tweak it to your tastes. I like to make decent sized meatballs. This recipe makes, the way I roll them, about 1.5 inch in diameter, makes about 36 meatballs. And we will start rolling the meatballs. I have a large pan here so that I can cook all of the meatballs at one time. It's really too many meatballs to use a 9x13, so I used a large sheet pan. An important thing to remember is that you want to make sure you have sides to the edges because this will create juice. So you don't want to just use a flat pan and have all the juice running off the meatballs. So let's go ahead, pull up our sleeves here, and roll meatballs. This is a great dinner too that freezes well, but you can make it up in advance. So if I make this recipe for company a lot of times, and I'll make the recipe the day before the company's coming, bake them, get the mess of making meatballs all out of the way, and then the day that they come, I will put them in some sauce in the crock pot and no mess. It's good to make sure they're somewhat the same size because then they will cook evenly. If you have some that are really small and some that are bigger, then the big ones will need longer to cook and the small meatballs will overcook. So you try to make them as uniform as possible. We are going to put these in the oven, 350 degrees, for about 35 minutes. The meatballs baked, took about 35 minutes for them to bake. I took them off of the pan, and this time I decided to put them in the crock pot. It's actually my favorite way to serve the meatballs. I put them in the morning or as soon as they're done baking, pour some spaghetti sauce over top, and let them simmer for several hours. And the meatballs really get a lot of flavor that way. So that is our favorite way to do it. I am going to serve up a meatball splash. My school lunch ladies taught me this little trick. You just put meatballs on a bun, and we like to sprinkle a little bit of cheese on top, and you have a meatball sandwich. The more traditional way to serve meatballs is, of course, over a bed of spaghetti. You can also use any type of pasta noodle you would like to, of course. An extra sauce, and that sauce, if you simmer it in the crock pot with the meatballs, gets a meaty flavor, and it is delicious. So again, these homemade Italian meatballs are a great recipe to have in your recipe box.